Okay, so carb counting, I'm using as an example spelt pasta, and I know that for 100 grams of dry pasta, because it doesn't say cooked, so we assume dry, the carbs is 62 grams per 100, which is the same as 62%. For ease of mathematics, I'm just going to say 60%, but we could say 62. And what I've done is I've weighed out 120 grams total weight of spelt pasta. So there's 100 grams, for every 100 grams of weight there are 60 grams of carbs, and I'll put a C for carbs. I've weighed out 120 grams, so I know that 120, there are quicker ways of doing this, but if I divide that by 100 equals 1%, times it by 60 equals 72. So there are 72 grams of carbs in total in that whole spelt pasta portion. Now, when it's cooked, the pasta will swell up and bulk, and when you drain the water, it'll have multiplied in weight by about 2 or 3 times. It's actually 2.7 I work it out as. So if 100 grams by the time it's cooked will weigh 270 grams, but the carbs in it will be 60 grams throughout, and 120 grams in my example will be 72 grams. Now, what I could do is just cook all this and then half it. Let's say you're having half between 2 people. That's quite a lot, but imagine you're having half between 2 people. Then it's quite easy to say that each person has 35, 36 grams each, because it's just half of that. If you're doing it by 3 people equally, then when it's finished cooking, whatever the weight is, divide it by 3, that's what each person gets. Divide that 72 by 3, that's the carbs that each person gets. What I'm going to do is something a bit more distinct for my daughter, who's only 4, so she only uses a bit. And normally when it's cooked, if it was something like a pizza or flat, like a pie or something more liquidy, then literally I'd just get everything level in here as best I can, separate it in half that way, separate it in half again, they're quarters, and I know that she'd eat about a quarter, so I'd divide that 72 by 4 or whatever. But I'm going to I'll show you in a bit that once you know the multiplication from dry times 2.7 equals wet, it's handy knowing that multiplier just for a lot of foods that you eat normally. So pasta tends to double in weight. Pearl barley is a lot more. I need to check that. Spelt pasta is 2.7. We tend to have a lot of that. So by the time this is cooked, that 120 grams, I'm not going to bother cooking it, I'll just do it on here. So that 120 grams times 2.7 will weigh 324 grams cooked. So 120 grams dry equals 324 grams, let's say wet. So what I do then is I'll dig off a portion for my daughter, and let's say for argument's sake it weighs 60 grams wet. Well, that's already been multiplied by 2.7, so if I do 60 grams divided by 2.7, that means there was 22 grams of dry pasta that went into it. And 22 grams of dry pasta at 60%, so I'll do 22 divided by 100 equals 1%, times by 60 equals, so there's 13 grams of 13 grams of carbs in 22 grams, what was 22 grams of dry pasta, which is actually 60 grams of wet. So yeah, when it's all cooked, I'll put a dish on a plate, scoop out 60 grams of pasta, and I know that in that 60 grams of cooked spelt pasta there are 13 carbs. But I've had to do a bit of jiggery pokery to get there. Over time you get a knack for it. Knowing this fiddle factor is useful if you you know, if you didn't weigh it in the first place, or just stick with it dry and say there's 72 grams in the lot, and then half of that, if you halved the cooked weight, whatever the cooked weight comes out as, you know there's about 35 grams, 36 grams. If you gave somebody a quarter of the